My name is Dennis Tillman. Those of you who attended the OS2 conference in Seattle will remember me as the MC of the conference. I will be introducing the speakers and the topics of their talk to you at the beginning of each of these videotapes. The questions that you asked during the conference, along with our answers to them, will be provided to you in writing along with these tapes. Steve Ballmer, our Vice President of System Software, will be speaking to us about what we can expect from the future of microcomputing. In Microsoft, Steve has responsibility for the development, testing, and marketing of all system software, including present and future versions of DOS, Windows, and languages. Steve is a graduate of Harvard, and he attended Stanford's Graduate School of Business. Steve will be taking a look at the present state of affairs in microcomputing, the forces driving the market, and what impact they and OS2 will have on the future direction of our industry.
Thanks, Dennis. Most of you think you're here for the OS2 Software Developers Conference. You're wrong. We're going to start out with Jim and Tammy's OS2 Revival. I'm going to try to give you a little bit of a feel what our marketing view is of OS2, how we've approached the problems, Microsoft's commitment to the product, and sketch in some of that detail for you before we actually get started on the technical stuff. Trust me, I'm the only non-technical speaker that you'll listen to, but let me try to track you through some of the overall strategy, and then we can get into the technical specifics. OS2 has been a massive campaign for us. We want to do a very good job in making sure that you can get started very early writing OS2 applications. And that was really the reason why we embarked on this task of doing an OS2 Software Developers Kit and putting together these conferences. We really do think that OS2 will be the basis for the next 1,000 exciting new applications. And we've tried very, very hard to get the tools in place for you to get started. Our original commitment had been to ship the toolkit by August 1st. We're shipping it to you here early during the month of June so that you can get started a little bit early. All of the components that we originally committed for August 1 are there, except the Presentation Manager specification. You'll receive your first update with the Presentation Manager spec by August 1 as initially committed. What I want to do is track you through a couple things. Number one, I want to talk a little bit about the current generation first, MS-DOS, Windows, and NET, and what happens to those as we move to this OS2 world. I want to talk to you shortly about the process of OS2 development. I want to talk a little bit about how OS2 marries up to different hardware platforms. I want to talk a little bit about what OS2 and the OS2 LAN Manager really are and what will make those successful. I want to talk a little bit about the role of the independent software developer in OS2 and our ongoing commitment to support you. Then we'll talk about the 386 and some business issues. The first thing you have to understand is we really have two objectives. We have an ongoing objective to evolve the current generation of system software, MS-DOS, Windows, and Microsoft networks, while we develop the new generation of software, OS2 and the OS2 LAN Manager. Our focus on the current generation, on MS-DOS, Windows, and NET, will really be on performance and usability. We don't have an objective to add significant numbers of new programmatic interfaces, or so-called APIs, Application Program Interfaces, into DOS and Windows. The focus of that work is really in OS2. First, MS-DOS. We think MS-DOS will continue to be the dominant operating system in the near term. For the next 2 years or so, we'll continue to sell many more units of MS-DOS than we do OS2, because it'll take a while for the volume of OS2 applications to develop. We'll continue to put effort in, as we have in MS-DOS 3.3, into performance improvements, into usability improvements. We've recently introduced a product that we call the MS-DOS Manager, which is essentially an add-on piece that can replace Command Com and serve as a super easy-to-use interface for the first-time user of MS-DOS. And it's that kind of ongoing enhancement, improvements to the MS-DOS Manager, additional performance improvements, etc., that you can expect to see in additional releases of the MS-DOS 3 family. Windows. Windows is the clear winner for real mode systems in terms of doing graphical user interface. We've shipped now, slide says 800,000 units. We're actually now something over 1 million units of Windows have been shipped. We have over 150 committed ISVs, including Microsoft Corporation, Aldus, Lotus, and many others. There are over 25 hardware vendors shipping Windows with their systems, including people like Zenith, AT&T, NEC in Japan. IBM introduced what they call a solution pack for desktop publishing that includes Windows and a Model 30, PS2 Model 30 as bundled components. Windows has an incredible amount of momentum in its drive to present standard user interface, to do graphical user interface, and if you will, it really is the vehicle of choice for this kind of innovation in the DOS3 real mode world. What's the future for Microsoft Windows? Additional performance improvements. We've announced version 2.0. Version 2.0 will ship over the summer. It has dramatically improved performance, up to 7 times faster on certain text out operations, but I think you'll notice that the system is just a lot zippier. Number 2, we've changed the user interface somewhat on version 2 versus version 1 to match up with the user interface on the OS2 presentation manager, so that the user interface for Windows 2.0 and for OS2 Presentation Manager are identical. That will allow you, the ISV, to create an application that has exactly this manual, function, performance characteristics, etc. between the two systems, so that you can go in and train the dealers who can sell a single application from you that looks exactly the same in protected mode under OS2 or in real mode under Microsoft Windows. In addition, Windows 2 supports bank switch memory to give applications up to an effective 150K of additional address space. And we provide for some additional device support, some new printers, some new screens, etc. Just a reminder, that'll ship in the 3rd quarter of this year, which means summer of '87. Microsoft Networks. Microsoft Networks is our DOS3 server, DOS3 workstation networking product. It was introduced at the time of the AT with the original networking solutions from IBM, and has really been the standard setter in terms of microcomputer networking architectures. It defined the NetBIOS and SMB standards that we've all gotten to know so well, and we will, if you will, over time, really move the server work on Microsoft Networks will phase over to work on the LAN Manager, so that all of Microsoft file service, print service, etc. will be OS2 based, not DOS3 based. The LAN Manager product, though, will include enhancements essentially to MSNet that allow for very strong communication from DOS3 workstations to OS2 servers, and from OS2 workstations to OS2 servers. The LAN Manager product, as I'll describe in a little bit, really does perpetuate forward these standards. The SMB protocols for file service, the NetBIOS interface, and the MS-DOS file sharing redirector standards that we've gotten to know so well. Let me talk a little bit about the process of developing OS2, because it really has been dramatically different to develop a product like OS2 than a product like MS-DOS. Back in 1981, for example, when we did the first version of MS-DOS, we were a very small company. We had a small group of products. Teams typically had just 3 people or so on them. A specification might be just 100 pages or so, and it was very simple to create and market products. For those of you who have received your development kit, which you know is some 75 pounds and a huge box of stuff, I've got one here. I'm not going to try to pick it up and show it to you. I'd probably break my back. It's become a lot more complicated chore. The number of people in the group has gone from 16 in '81 to some 300 today. The number of pages in the specification for the product have gone from perhaps 100 pages to some 1,500 pages. The number of components in the product has gone up. You used to just be able to do the operating system. Now you expect from us operating systems, compilers, debuggers, very rich graphics package, networking, All of those pieces need to come when the operating system, if you will, itself comes. Unfortunately, the length of projects has also increased. We've gone from something like 4 months for MS-DOS version 1 to OS 2, which has taken roughly 3.5 years. As I've said, part of the reason for that time frame for OS 2 was really bringing all the pieces in place. The networking, the graphics, the languages, and we took those in smaller pieces as we've moved from a release to release of MS-DOS. The good news and the important news for you is the next really key step from OS 2 to the 386 version of OS 2 will not take as long as 3.5 years. We've said that we think we'll have the tools in place for developers to do 386 applications sometime in the early 1989 timeframe, or something more like 2 years. Let me turn now to the hardware platforms, if you will, that OS 2 supports. First, let me talk just very briefly about the IBM PS2, which is really a very nice piece of work that IBM did, which we expect to become very, very popular. As most of you know, it means 3.5-inch disks, it means microchannel architecture, and most significantly, I think, from a Microsoft perspective, it means very rich, high-resolution graphics built in on the motherboard, like the VGA. And OS 2 certainly supports PS2. OS 2 also supports the current installed base of ATs and AT compatibles. In fact, one of the very nice things about OS 2, including the presentation manager, is that it provides a very high level of independence of the applications from the underlying hardware, so that you can write a single application that runs on top of OS 2, and that'll run on the PS2, it'll run on the ATs, and it'll run on a host of AT compatibles. We'll have a much higher level of independence of applications from the hardware than we ever have before, particularly with the presentation manager, isolating applications from screens and printers, etc., etc. And we think this will make it possible for a lot more innovation by hardware vendors in terms of the underlying hardware platforms than we've ever had before, and we think that's very nice. Now, OS 2 itself will be far more tightly tied to the hardware than any version of MS-DOS has had. But the applications themselves will be absolutely hardware dependent. All of the hardware isolation will occur in OS 2 itself, so that other systems, 386 systems like the compact systems, the Intel inboard, the PC's limited machines, and many, many more, will all run OS 2 just fine. Existing 286 AT compatibles will do a nice job of running OS 2. And as I said, we'll have room for a great amount of innovation in hardware and in application software while preserving, if you will, application libraries at all times. And we think that gives you as developers and the hardware vendors an opportunity to really move forward in very innovative and clever ways. IBM and the rest of the vendors will all have that flexibility. Okay, let me turn to a couple of observations about OS 2 itself. First of all, we view OS 2 as a full step forward for the industry, not a half step. We could have broken OS 2 up into a number of little releases. We could have done first multitasking and then large memory and then graphics and broken this thing up into many, many small releases. But the feedback that we got from you, from the software vendors, was really that you wanted these releases in bigger chunks. You simply didn't want to have 8 different design points that the operating system presented, and then you'd have to worry about having versions that supported DOS N and N.1 and .2, .3, .4, that a few important design points were far more important than in dribbling function out to the market. So we've taken a full step and packaged together really a very rich set of function. And we've tried to really think through what the key standards would be, how we provide them, what the key requirements would be from applications. And last, but certainly not least, how we would provide backward compatibility with the set of applications that you've already written for DOS 3. The 286 certainly presents a number of challenges in terms of providing access to larger than 640K of memory, but still running the applications that have been written for MS-DOS today. What then were the challenges in OS 2? Number one, to provide full capabilities of a mini-computer-like operating system. Rich memory management, semaphores, signals, threads, different forms of inter-process communication. Very, very important. We needed to have the full range of task management, device management, inter-process communication that you would expect out of any mini-computer operating system. Secondly, we needed to really provide an operating system where you could do rich graphical applications that provide for high ease of use and high interaction with your end users. That really meant to us graphical user interface. And we based the technology in OS 2 off of our Microsoft Windows product. Number three, we needed to protect the investment that you've made in, and more importantly, really, that all of our customers have made in an application library of software. We have to run existing MS-DOS applications. That was a key requirement for OS 2. We needed to exploit the 286, though, to run new applications that could access 16 megabytes of memory. The 286 is a chip that is designed to either run in its real mode, which has 640K of addressability, or in the protected mode, which provides for 16 megabytes of addressability. And we had to come up with what is now a patented technique to allow us to move the processor back and forth between those two modes at runtime and run applications concurrently in both worlds. The tough part is the only way to move from protected mode back to real mode is to triple fault the processor and essentially reboot it. Well, if you think about this notion of letting the chip run and triple faulting it many times, if you will, in a minute, it's really a very, very tough and challenging problem, which I'll let Gordon Letwin describe. Lastly, we really had to think through the migration issues in this operating system to make it easy to move on to the 386. I think a key thing for everybody to understand about OS 2 is as IBM has introduced OS 2, it is stated that OS 2 is a full participant in IBM's SAA, or Systems Application Architecture, which is the set of architectures that IBM announced for cross-systems compatibility, PC, System36, and mainframe compatibility. They really announced a few things. Number one, that they would define an architecture to have common user access or common user interface, if you will, across the three systems. And the OS 2 presentation manager complies with the SAA user access or user interface guidelines. Very important. Number two, OS 2, to the extent that it has the services that are SAA services like graphics, etc., it was very important that it comply with the SAA guidelines for programming interfaces and that they be common between OS 2, if you will, and other IBM systems. IBM's SAA also defines standards for communication support and a common set of applications. IBM has announced that OS 2 is a full participant in SAA. For details really of what SAA is and what the SAA spec is and how OS 2 participates, you'll really need to talk to IBM. But it was certainly very key for us as a design point of OS 2 in working together with IBM to meet the SAA requirements. Certainly, the requirement to be SAA compliant was a factor in terms of the changes that we made in the Windows user interface, or the presentation user interface, presentation manager user interface, if you will, and in some of the changes we made to the programmatic interfaces between Windows and the presentation manager. OS 2 really is an operating system for the future. As I said, it provides great virtual memory management, multitasking, dynamic linking, IPC, all stuff we'll describe later, and much of it, frankly, derived from earlier work we had done in real mode multitasking systems, and most significantly from Microsoft Windows. We also defined an architecture that will allow you, the ISV, to essentially install additional components into the operating system, a way for you to do shared code libraries, etc. We've also designed OS2 to fix many of the architectural limitations in DOS 3, things that people discovered techniques like terminate and stay resident programs, bank switch memory, to solve in the DOS 3 world, and everybody solved them a little bit different, and they're all a little bit incompatible. Those are now architected into OS2. There's a pop-up window mechanism, there's a standard way to hook the keyboard, many other important features. The OS2 Windows Presentation Manager is very important. IBM announced from IBM 2 products, OS2 version 1.0 Standard Edition and OS2 1.1 Standard Edition. The so-called OS2 1.1 product, 1.0 will ship in the first quarter of '88. 1.1 will follow it, and it will include the so-called Presentation Manager piece, which is the graphical user interface piece based upon Windows. IBM announced that there would essentially be a free upgrade for anybody who purchased 1.0 to the 1.1 product, which means that you can really assume that your standard design point is version 1.1. Everybody will have the full range of kernel services, memory management, multitasking, etc., as well as the graphical user interface services, dialogues, menus, scroll bars, rich text, etc. And it really becomes then, for this next generation of application, that becomes the standard design point that we really think the key applications will write to. And it's that full color graphical user interface. There's a user shell which will mask the intricacies of Command XE or Command COM, if you will, from users. Certainly people who want to will still have access to those services, but there'll be a very friendly integrated shell built into the Presentation Manager. We've designed a library that will allow you to run simple text apps if that's what you want to run, and they can run in a window of the Presentation Manager. There's a new and improved graphics library that benefits a lot from the work that we did with IBM and the work that IBM's done up with host graphics packages. But the API and the device driver interfaces of the Presentation Manager are somewhat different than the Windows interfaces, and Manny Velen will describe those later. The Presentation Manager and Microsoft Windows, what's the comparison? How do those things relate? Number one, with Windows 2.0 and the Presentation Manager, those things have exactly the same user interface, the same interaction techniques, the same way of editing text, pulling down menus, scrolling documents, the same keyboard usage, the same documentation, etc. And there's a common set of development tools for you as a developer: compilers, linkers, resource compiler, resource editors, etc. The APIs, though, are not exactly the same, and we are developing a set of transition aids to allow you to keep source codes that support both Microsoft Windows in real mode and the Presentation Manager in protected mode. Most of the session that we're doing here, frankly, the better part of the time, will actually be spent on the Presentation Manager. Of the 900 or so programmatic interfaces in OS2, roughly 2/3 of them are actually, if you will, Presentation Manager programmatic interfaces. How should you as a developer think about this move from Microsoft Windows to OS2? Well, first, I think it's important to remember there are a couple different versions of Windows. There's Windows version 1.04, which is shipping now, and there's Windows version 2, also a real mode product, which will ship this summer. There is no need for you to change your application to move from version 1.04 to 2.0. We are changing the user interface, and the style guidelines are changing, so you may want to migrate your app, but we will run your current binaries. So version 2 has the new look and interface of the Presentation Manager and essentially has improved performance. Between Windows version 2 and the Presentation Manager, you would need to convert to the new API. Those are two different APIs, if you will, and you need to have two different source codes for those. If I was to make a recommendation, I would recommend that you start development now with the current Windows Developers Kit, which we're providing each of you purchasers of the OS2 Software Development Kit. You'll get the spec on the Presentation Manager by August, and you'll have code for it sometime in the later part of this year. A number of ISVs have already rushed to announce support for OS2 Presentation Manager. Lotus has announced 3 applications, 123 version 3, 123G, and Lotus DBMS, 2 of which, the DBMS and the 123G product, will require OS2 and the Presentation Manager, or OS2, I should say, including the Presentation Manager, since it's a standard component. Let me touch quickly on the LAN Manager, if I might. The LAN Manager essentially does a number of very important things. Number one, it moves all of our network server work off of DOS 3 and onto OS2. In the OS2 world, which is a multitasking world, there are many, many things we can do to provide much higher performance file and print service than we ever could provide on top of DOS 3. The second thing it does, which I think is actually far more dramatic, is that the LAN Manager provides essentially for distributed processing of arbitrary OS2 calls. So that if you want to write an OS2 application, you can actually break it into pieces, server piece and a workstation piece, and have that work very, very smoothly. Take, for example, a database product, which might have a user interface piece and then an engine which actually knows how to go look for data. Well, you could write that as a single application on top of OS2, making OS2 calls. And say the front end collects data and maybe it puts it into an OS2 pipe, and then the back end reads information out of the pipe and goes and finds the data. Well, under the LAN Manager, we can essentially process, if the engine and the workstation piece are on the same machine, we'll process the requests, if you will, on the same machine. If the engine is actually out someplace across the network, the LAN Manager can recognize that and route arbitrary calls to OS2 down across the net, making it very easy to write this distributed application. And this has been a hard thing to do so far, and we haven't really seen a lot of very strong distributed applications like distributed database, mail, calendaring, source code control, etc. And I think we'll really see a breakthrough. I think that'll actually be the first place where we see breakthrough applications on top of OS2 will be in the area of writing these networked applications. And we think that's really a key area of growth. There are also a number of usability enhancements in the LAN Manager, but we provide full compatibility with the protocols, NetBIOS, SMB, etc., that we established in Microsoft Networks. Let me turn to some business issues now that I've described the product, and maybe give you first a little bit of perspective. First of all, why did MS-DOS become a standard? I mean, we believe and we think we've got a product and a marketing plan that's going to allow OS2 to be a standard. But it's important to maybe take a look at the MS-DOS history and then look at OS2 in that context. Well, first, because it was an open, consistent architecture that was supported by many hardware manufacturers, Tandy, Compaq, NCR, Zenith, and many, many more. OS2, like MS-DOS, will be licensed to Microsoft to the full range of hardware vendors with whom we do business. It's a product that we will license exactly as we have licensed MS-DOS. Second was the decision in the MS-DOS case to use a 16-bit chip. Well, the key decision in the OS2 case is to require the 286 for multitasking and for large memory. We could have waited for the 386. We would have restricted the installed base of systems that we could sell to. OS2 has a huge installed base of 286 systems to sell into and provides a huge future for the 386. The last thing was the momentum of the software industry. All of you and many, many more wrote applications, many applications which made DOS successful. And that really is the key juncture that we think we're at with OS2, is getting the same kind of software support for OS2 that we had for MS-DOS. MS-DOS is installed on over 9 million machines, and if you think about it, that really is something of a miracle. Then I guess the conclusion I'm trying to reach here is that the measure of success for OS2, like the measure of success for DOS, will be the number of applications that run on it. In the MS-DOS case, it actually took time to build up the application library, which is now some 10,000. And you can see in this chart how that really has ramped up steadily from 1981. And not unlike MS-DOS, OS2 will also take time to be successful. You shouldn't expect it immediately to fly off the shelves and people to flock to buy it. There's simply no good reason to buy OS2 until there's a new body of applications that require it. If all people want to do is run their existing applications, MS-DOS, frankly, is a better environment to do that in than OS2. It provides no value to old applications. Let me talk about the toolkit just for a second, and then we'll get into the technical talks. The toolkits which you've received include the OS2 kernel, C compiler, an assembler, debugger, linker, and a number of other tools. There's technical specs, and there's code for all of those pieces. You will receive from us periodic updates that include additional documentation on the presentation manager and the LAN manager, and then the full set of software, right up to the time of our final release, when you get software that matches up with the final OS2 compiler, network software, etc. The software that you're getting is pre-release software. It's going to have problems. I urge you to, through the dial support system, which comes as part of your toolkit, to let us know what the problems are, to flag them for us, etc. It's a product that's going to have to get better and better, but we need your feedback. If you want production, shippable quality, you should wait to first quarter of 1988 from IBM or from some other time from some of the other vendors, or I'm sorry, for that time frame for some of the other vendors. But we think this pre-release software is very usable, and you'll be able to make a lot of progress towards doing OS2 applications. There'll be some specification changes between now and the time we ship. We think those will be very, very minor, but we'll be taking out the bugs and improving the performance. We've had a lot of input already from software vendors on OS2. That's been invaluable. It helps us to really make sure we factored in the requirements that you people have. We get early review of the key components, and it builds in the kind of quality that we think is very important. We need more feedback, though, and we need to be able to do a good job of being responsive to your needs. And there are really a number of things that we're doing. There's this dials, bulletin board, and question and answer bug reporting system, which comes standard as part of the toolkit. There are seminars, like the seminars that we're doing now. We've created a thing called Microsoft University, where you can go if you want to take follow-up detailed courses on Windows, on OS2, on a number of other things. We have a very large dedicated support staff, the size of which we've just about tripled in the process of getting prepared for the shipment of this software development kit. I can't promise you that we're going to do a perfect job of supporting you this time out the door, but we're going to do a damn good job, and we are putting an incredibly high level of additional investment into our development support mechanism. And last but not least, there's the Microsoft Systems Journal, which we publish every couple of months. The OS2 edition is out. I think you'll find a lot of very interesting articles in there explaining OS2. And as I've said, in 87, 88, we will be increasing the level of investment that we put into supporting you. I want to talk about the 386 just for half a second as we look to the future. Microsoft has done a lot of work with the 386. We have a version of our Xenix operating system that runs on the 386. We did with Compact, the expanded memory manager, which does essentially bank-switched emulation on the 386. We've got a C compiler for the 386. We've done a lot of work using and prototyping into products the virtual mode capabilities of the 386. And we think we've really thought through very carefully what the issues will be in terms of migrating OS2 to the 386. We have, in a number of ways, prototyped extensions to OS2 for the 386, looking at using virtual mode, using the 32-bit addressability of the 386, and using demand paging, And we think we really have a very good handle on what it'll take to migrate. When we move from 286 to 386, essentially all we're going to do is extend the programmatic interfaces in this OS2 product to take advantage of and to give you access to the additional addressing capabilities of the 386. We'll also take advantage of virtual mode so that people can get better utilization of their current application base. But we think that's very well thought through, and we feel comfortable with the kind of time frames we've talked about for 386 work. Just a couple more points, and then I'll move on. Number one, Microsoft OS2 will be equivalent to IBM OS2 Standard Edition. The same applications will run on OS2 Standard Edition and Microsoft OS2. There are no differences. I think this is something that the press has made very, very confusing. Rest assured, an application that runs on IBM OS2 will run on Microsoft OS2. The two products are the same. We will license OS2 to our OEM customers, just like we've always licensed MS-DOS. OS2 with the proper set of device drivers will run on existing 286 machines, 286 compatibles, and it will run the great majority of existing applications. It'll run Sidekick, it'll run TopView, it'll run Microsoft Word, Lotus 123, DBase 3. The only thing, frankly, I can tell you we will not run is we will not run existing disk device drivers. You will need to get a new set of device drivers. A couple other key points. OS2 will only be successful, as I've said, as quickly as you write new applications. We do think it will eventually be the standard for office computing, say 2.5 years from now. And we will provide developers with the opportunity to do the next 1,000 exciting applications. Thanks a lot for your time. We'll dive into the technical stuff. I guess if Dennis says it's all right, we'll try to take a few questions. Thanks.
For additional information on the topic we just covered, be sure to take a look at the written questions and answers that accompanied this videotape.